In the vast and mysterious galaxy, the Empress of the Valtor Dominion stood as a symbol of power and fear. She was known as an immortal ruler, having lived for centuries, with her reign lasting long enough to see the rise and fall of entire civilizations. She was admired by many, but few truly understood the weight of the crown she wore. Every decision she made, every life she took, was a consequence of a reality few could comprehend. For those who served under her, the Empress was more than just a ruler. She was an enigma, a force beyond measure. The soldiers who stood by her side, guarding her from those who sought to harm her, knew the dangers of their duty. Among them was Lieutenant Kale, a soldier whose loyalty to the Empress was unmatched. He had served in her personal guard for many years, and though he had fought in countless battles, he still felt the same rush of duty whenever he stood by her side. Kale's loyalty was not born out of fear but respect. He had witnessed firsthand the sacrifices she had made, the burdens she had carried. Her immortality was a curse, not a blessing. She had lived so long that the faces of her loved ones had come and gone, and even the galaxy itself had changed around her. The people who once worshipped her had become suspicious of her endless reign. Some whispered that she had become too powerful, too distant from the struggles of the ordinary people. Despite the pressure she faced, the Empress remained calm, composed, and ever-present. She was a living legend, a symbol of strength that had never wavered. But Kale knew there was more to her than the cold exterior she showed the world. He had seen the moments of doubt in her eyes, the weariness that came with carrying the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders. He could feel the deep loneliness she hid behind her stoic gaze. As Kale stood guard outside the grand hall where the Empress held court, he reflected on his years of service. He had been with her through the rise and fall of many factions, through wars and peace treaties, and yet there was always something new on the horizon. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and no one was ever truly safe. Assassins, spies, and traitors lurked in every corner, plotting against the Empress in the shadows. It was Kale's job, along with the other members of the Royal Guard, to ensure that no harm came to her. But today felt different. There was a tension in the air, a feeling that something was about to unfold that would change everything. Kale could sense it in the quiet whispers of the servants and the nervous glances exchanged by the guards. Something was coming, something none of them were prepared for. The Empress, as always, remained unaware of the growing threat. She sat at her throne, listening to the requests of her advisors and the petitions of her people. Her mind, however, was elsewhere. Kale had noticed her distractions over the past few days, moments when she seemed lost in thought, as if she were somewhere far beyond the palace walls. He had always admired her strength, but lately he couldn't help but wonder if it was beginning to crack. The endless years of ruling, the endless years of watching those she loved fall away, had left their mark on her. The Empress was not invincible. Even immortality had its limits, Kale thought. Just as Kale's thoughts began to drift, a sudden commotion broke out in the hall. The door slammed open, and a group of armed men rushed in, their faces masked in shadows. Kale's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his weapon, his heart pounding in his chest. His training kicked in immediately, but there was no time to act before the intruders were upon them. "Protect the Empress!" Kale shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. He pushed forward, drawing his blade and stepping between the intruders and the Empress. The guards moved quickly, fighting to protect their queen, but the attackers were skilled. Kale's blade clashed with one of the attackers, the sound of metal ringing through the hall. He fought with every ounce of strength he had, his mind focused solely on keeping the Empress safe. But as he fought, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of dread. This wasn't like any other attack they had faced. This one was different, calculated, precise, and far more dangerous than any before. Through the haze of battle, Kale's eyes locked onto the Empress, who was standing at the far end of the hall. Her expression was calm, almost serene, as if she knew this moment would come. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, Kale saw something he had never seen before. Vulnerability. In that fleeting instant, Kale realized just how much the Empress had sacrificed. Her immortality had not come without a cost. She had lived through countless wars, watched as generations of people came and went, and endured the weight of a galaxy that demanded her to be perfect. But as the battle raged on, Kale was jolted back into the present. One of the intruders managed to break through the defenses, making their way toward the Empress. Without thinking, Kale moved to intercept, his blade cutting through the air with deadly precision. The attacker, however, was faster. In a moment of sheer desperation, Kale leaped forward, his body colliding with the assassin just as the blade was about to strike the Empress. The blow was meant for her, but Kale took the full force of it, his chest bursting with pain. For a moment, everything seemed to slow. Cale felt the weight of his body crash to the ground, his vision fading. The last thing he saw was the Empress, her eyes wide with shock and sorrow. He had done it. He had saved her, but at what cost? Cale's vision was blurry, the world around him spinning as he lay on the cold, stone floor of the grand hall. Pain radiated from his chest, each breath he took feeling like shards of glass were piercing his lungs. He tried to lift his hand, to reach for his weapon, but the effort was in vain. His body refused to obey. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hall, but they seemed distant, muffled as if he were hearing them from far away. Through the fog of his fading consciousness, Cale could make out a figure standing over him. It was the Empress, her face pale, her expression filled with shock and disbelief. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ringing in his ears. Cale's mind raced. He had done his duty. He had taken the shot meant for her. But now, as the pain grew more intense, doubt began to creep in. Was this the right choice? Had he sacrificed himself for nothing? What would become of the Empress now? He could feel the blood soaking his clothes, the warmth spreading through his body as life slowly began to slip away. Cale fought to stay conscious, his thoughts drifting in and out of focus. The Empress knelt beside him, her hands trembling as they hovered over his wound, but there was nothing she could do. For all her power, her immortality, there was nothing that could save him now. Cale had made the ultimate sacrifice, and now it was time for him to pay the price. "Stay with me, Cale," the Empress said, her voice firm yet filled with a sadness Cale had never heard before. He tried to smile, but it was a weak, fleeting attempt. He had always known the Empress was strong, but in this moment, Cale saw something he had never seen before: vulnerability. The Empress, immortal and unyielding, was just as human as anyone else. She, too, could feel the weight of loss and the sharp sting of grief. The battle outside the hall had stopped. The silence was oppressive, as if the entire galaxy was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Cale could hear the soft murmur of the other guards, but they were distant, like voices from another world. "Why?" the Empress asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you do this?" Cale wanted to respond, to explain that it was because she was the heart of the Dominion, and he would do anything to protect her. But the words wouldn't come. His throat felt tight, his body weakening with each passing second. He had no answer for her. There were no words that could explain the loyalty he felt toward her, no words that could convey the depth of his sacrifice. He had done it because it was his duty, because in his heart he believed that the Empress was the galaxy's last hope. But now, as he felt the darkness closing in, he wondered if that belief had been misplaced. He reached out a hand, weakly grasping hers, the only comfort he could offer in this final moment. The Empress's fingers closed around his, her grip tight and desperate. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry you had to suffer for me." Cale shook his head, but the movement was barely noticeable. There was no time for apologies, no time for regret. His time was running out. The last thing he remembered was the Empress's face, her eyes filled with sorrow, as if she understood the cost of immortality. It was a price that could never truly be paid, and Cale, in his death, had paid it for her. When Kyle woke, it was not to the sounds of battle or the cold stone floor of the hall. Instead, he was surrounded by a soft golden light. His vision was blurry at first, but as his senses slowly returned, he realized that he was no longer in the hall. The pain, the blood, the weight of his body, it was all gone. He was weightless, as if floating in a dream. He tried to move, but his body felt strange. His limbs were heavy, unresponsive. The light around him was blinding, and he squinted against it, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Cale!" a voice called out to him, soft and gentle, but filled with authority. It was the Empress's voice. Cale's heart skipped a beat, but as he tried to speak, he realized that no sound came from his mouth. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. "Don't be afraid," the Empress continued, her voice soothing. "You are not dead. Not yet. But you are not the same either." Cale's mind raced.
What did she mean?
What was happening to him? The light began to dim, and slowly his surroundings became clearer. He was in a chamber unlike anything he had ever seen. It was vast, with walls made of shimmering metal that seemed to pulse with energy. Strange symbols and lights flickered in the air, creating an atmosphere that felt both ancient and futuristic at the same time. The Empress appeared before him, her face radiant and serene. But this time, Cale noticed something different. She was not the same woman he had served for so many years. She looked younger, her features softer, as if the weight of the centuries had been lifted from her. "You are in a place beyond time," she said, her eyes meeting his. "I brought you here to save you, Kale. To show you the truth." Kale tried to speak again, but the words still wouldn't come. He had so many questions, so many things he needed to understand. How had he survived? Why had the Empress saved him? "You were meant to die," the Empress said softly. "But I couldn't let you go. Not after what you did for me. You took a fatal shot for me, Kale. You saved me when no one else could. And now, I owe you everything." Kale felt a strange warmth in his chest, a sensation he couldn't explain. He could feel the Empress's power surrounding him, her presence more than just physical. It was as if she had become one with the very fabric of the universe itself. "But I cannot undo the past," she continued. "I cannot bring back those you've lost, nor can I change the course of history. All I can do is offer you a choice." The Empress stepped closer, her gaze intense. "You can stay here with me and live forever. You will have power beyond imagination, a chance to be by my side as we rebuild this galaxy together. Or you can return to the world you left behind." Kale felt his heart racing in his chest, his mind torn between the two options. One would grant him immortality, a chance to live without fear or pain. The other would return him to the life he had known, with all its dangers and uncertainties. But Kale knew deep down what the right choice was. He had always believed in the people of the galaxy, in their strength and resilience. He couldn't abandon them, not after everything he had fought for. With the little strength he had left, Kale managed to speak, his voice a mere whisper. "I want to return," he said. The Empress's expression softened and she nodded. "Then it shall be. But know this, Kale, you will never be alone. I will always be with you in your heart, in your soul." Kale's return to the physical world was nothing like he had expected. It wasn't the familiar bustling streets of the Valtor Dominion or the grand halls of the palace. Instead, he woke in a small, dimly lit room. The air was thick with dust, and the only sound was the slow drip of water somewhere in the distance. His body felt heavy, as if it were made of stone. For a moment he lay there, confused, unsure of where he was or how he had arrived. He tried to move, but his limbs were stiff, reluctant to obey. His mind raced, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion. The last thing he remembered was the Empress. The warmth of her presence, her promise to bring him back. But now, he was here, alone. Forcing himself to sit up, Kale surveyed his surroundings. The room was small, just a single bed and a wooden table that looked old and worn. There were no windows, no signs of life. It felt like a place forgotten by time. But despite the darkness, there was a sense of calm. It wasn't the fear and chaos of battle that he was used to, but something else. Something that reminded him of the peace he had once hoped to find in the galaxy. Kale swung his legs off the bed, planting his feet firmly on the cold stone floor. His muscles ached, a dull throb that told him he had been through something far beyond the pain of battle. He ran his fingers through his hair, feeling the weight of the decision he had made. The choice he had taken when he had decided to return. He had chosen to leave the Empress's side, to return to the galaxy that had torn him apart. As he stood, Kale felt a strange sense of purpose wash over him. He wasn't the same as before. There was something different, something deep within him that felt stronger. His thoughts were clearer, sharper. He could feel the energy of the world around him, the pulse of life that had always existed, but he had never noticed before. It was as if he had awakened to a new reality, one where he could see the unseen and understand the unknown. But what did it mean? What was he supposed to do with this newfound power? And more importantly, what was his place in the galaxy now? He had always been just a soldier, a man whose sole purpose was to protect the Empress. But now, without her, without the guiding force of her immortal presence, what was left for him? Kale took a deep breath and slowly made his way to the door. He had to leave this room, had to find out what was happening. What had become of the galaxy? Had the Empress's reign fallen into ruin without him? Or had her immortality, her power, kept everything together, as it always had? The door creaked open with a slow, haunting sound. The hallway outside was dimly lit, with only a few flickering torches casting weak shadows on the walls. Kale stepped out, his boots echoing in the silence. The air smelled musty old. It was a stark contrast to the polished regal halls of the palace he had known. But it wasn't just the surroundings that had changed. It was him. He could feel the difference in his body, in his mind. The lingering sensation from the Empress's presence was still there, like a faint whisper at the back of his mind, guiding him, protecting him. But it wasn't the same. She wasn't there to lead him, to offer him answers. Now he had to find his own way. And he wasn't sure where to start. As he moved down the hallway, he came to a small set of stairs leading to the outside. He climbed them slowly, each step a reminder of the uncertainty that lay ahead. He didn't know what was waiting for him. He didn't know if he would even recognize the galaxy he had fought so hard to protect, but he had to find out. The door at the top of the stairs opened, and Kale stepped out into the sunlight. The world outside was nothing like the lush, vibrant landscapes of the Dominion. Instead, he found himself in a desolate wasteland. The ground was cracked and barren, stretching out for miles in every direction. There were no signs of life, no people, no buildings, no cities, just an endless stretch of dust and ruin. Kale's heart sank. This wasn't the world he had left behind. This wasn't the galaxy he had known. He stood there, staring at the bleak horizon, unsure of what to do next. But then something caught his eye. A flicker of movement in the distance. At first, it was just a shadow, something that seemed out of place in the barren wasteland. But as Kale focused, he saw it clearly. Figures moving in the distance, people, or what was left of them. They were stumbling across the land, their movements slow and ragged. Their faces were hidden behind masks of dust and dirt, but Kale could tell they were struggling. Without thinking, Kale began to walk toward them. His steps were steady, purposeful. As he drew closer, he could hear the faint murmur of voices, muffled by the wind. The figures in the distance seemed to grow larger as he approached, and soon he was close enough to make out their faces. They were survivors, the last remnants of humanity living in the wake of the destruction that had torn the galaxy apart. Their clothes were torn, their skins sunken and dirty. They looked like they hadn't eaten in days, maybe weeks. But there was something in their eyes, something that told Kale they were still alive, still fighting. He reached them, his presence like a beacon in the wasteland. The survivors looked up at him, their eyes filled with suspicion, but also a glimmer of hope. Kale stopped in front of them, his heart heavy with the weight of what had happened. They had survived, but at what cost? The galaxy was broken, its people scattered, and no one seemed to know how to pick up the pieces. "I'm here to help," Kale said, his voice firm. He had no plan, no grand strategy, but he knew that something had to change. These people couldn't survive on their own. They needed leadership, and if he had to step into that role, he would. He would rebuild what had been lost. The survivors looked at one another, uncertain. But then, a young woman stepped forward. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with determination. "We need someone to lead us," she said, her voice steady. "We need someone to bring us back from the brink." Kale nodded. He could feel the weight of their words, the responsibility that was now on his shoulders. It was a weight he hadn't expected, but it was one he was willing to bear. For the first time since his return, Kale felt a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about protecting the Empress anymore. This was about saving what was left of the galaxy. And if he had to fight for it, he would. Together, Kale and the survivors began to make their way across the barren land. They didn't know where they were going, but they knew they had to keep moving forward. The galaxy was broken, but it wasn't beyond repair. It would take time, effort, and sacrifice, but Kale was ready. He had chosen to return for a reason, and now he would make sure that reason didn't fade into the dust. Kale had led the survivors for weeks now, and though the journey was long, something had begun to stir within him. The galaxy, once vibrant and full of life, had become a wasteland of forgotten dreams. The people who had survived the destruction of their world were nothing like the grand warriors of the Dominion or the proud citizens who once flourished under the Empress's reign. These were ordinary people, struggling to find their place in a shattered universe. But with each passing day, Kale saw the spark of hope growing in their eyes. The small group of survivors had made camp in a once bustling city. The towering buildings, now worn down and crumbled, stood as silent witnesses to the devastation that had swept across the galaxy. It was strange for Kale to see the remnants of civilization in such a state of decay. He had always known the galaxy as a place of order, of strength. Yet now it was a place where silence reigned. Every morning, Kale would stand at the edge of the ruined city and look out at the horizon. He could still feel the Empress's presence deep within him. She wasn't with him physically, but in some strange way, she was always there. It was as if her spirit had been passed on to him, guiding his steps, reminding him of the responsibility that now lay on his shoulders. Despite the quiet, there was a certain rhythm to their days. The survivors had grown stronger, more determined. They built shelters from the wreckage of the city, growing what little food they could find and protecting each other from the threats that lingered in the wasteland. But Kale knew that this couldn't be enough. They needed to do more. They needed to rebuild. One morning, Kale gathered the group together. They were sitting in a circle around a small campfire, their faces tired but hopeful. It was time to make a decision. The survivors had grown accustomed to their new way of life, but Kale couldn't shake the feeling that they were merely surviving, not truly living. "We need to take the next step," Kale said, his voice steady yet filled with conviction. "We can't stay here forever. We need to find a place where we can rebuild, where we can start anew." The survivors looked at one another, uncertainty still lingering in their eyes. They had grown comfortable in the ruins, in the safety of their small makeshift community. But Kale knew that this was only temporary. They couldn't stay hidden forever. One of the survivors, a man named Dorian, spoke up. "Where would we go? The galaxy is gone. There's no hope left." Kale met his gaze, his eyes filled with a calm resolve. "We will create hope. We will build something from the ashes. We will find others, people who are still out there. There's a chance to rebuild the galaxy, even if it's small. But we can't do that by hiding in the ruins." Dorian hesitated, but then nodded slowly. Kale could see the doubt in his eyes, but there was also something else, a spark of hope that had been buried deep within him, now beginning to rise to the surface. The group agreed, and over the next few days they began to prepare. They gathered what little supplies they had, packed what few belongings they could carry, and began to make their way through the barren wasteland. It wasn't easy. The terrain was harsh, and the journey was long, but Kale could see the determination in the eyes of the survivors, and with each step, that determination grew stronger. As they traveled, they encountered more survivors, small groups, scattered across the land, all struggling to survive. Some were hesitant at first, not sure what Kale and his group wanted, but as soon as they heard Kale's words, they began to understand. He wasn't here to take control, he wasn't here to rule, he was here to give them hope, to give them a chance at a future. Over the weeks, Kale's group grew larger. They formed a small but united community of survivors, all working together to rebuild what had been lost. It wasn't easy, and there were still many challenges ahead. But Kale could feel the weight of the galaxy beginning to shift. The people of the galaxy weren't defeated yet. They still had a chance. One day, while they were traveling through a small town, Kale and a few of the survivors stumbled upon a hidden bunker. The entrance was concealed beneath the rubble, and at first they had no idea it even existed. But as they dug through the debris, they uncovered a hatch. It was old and rusted, but it still opened with a creak. Inside, they found a stockpile of supplies, food, water, and medical equipment. But more importantly, they found something that Kale hadn't expected: old communication equipment. He carefully examined the devices, his heart racing with anticipation. If this equipment still worked, they might be able to send a message, reach out to others who had survived. For days, Kale and his group worked to repair the equipment. It was difficult, the technology old and damaged, but Kale refused to give up. He knew that this was their chance. If they could contact the rest of the galaxy, they could begin to rebuild. They could begin to unite. Finally, after days of work, the communication device came to life. A low hum filled the air, and Kale's hands trembled as he reached out to make the connection. He entered the coordinates they had gathered, the ones that pointed to the central hub of the Dominion, the last known location of the Empress. The screen flickered, then cleared. A voice crackled through the speakers. It was faint, barely audible, but it was enough. "This is Commander Juno of the Valtor Dominion," the voice said. "Who is this?" Kale's heart skipped a beat. The Dominion had survived. The Empress's legacy had endured. She hadn't been alone in the end. There were still people out there, still fighting. "It's Kale," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've returned. I've brought survivors. We're ready to rebuild." There was a long pause, and Kale could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The silence was deafening, but then the voice returned, stronger this time. "Kale, you're alive."
"You've done it. You've given us hope."
Tears welled in Kale's eyes as he looked at the survivors around him. This was what they had been fighting for. This was the chance they had all hoped for, a chance to rebuild, to bring the galaxy back to life. The voice on the other end continued, "We'll send reinforcements. We'll help you rebuild. Together we can make the galaxy whole again." Kale nodded, a smile spreading across his face. It was just the beginning. But it was a beginning that he never thought he would see. And for the first time in a long while, Kale felt the weight on his shoulders lighten. He had made the right choice. The galaxy wasn't lost. It wasn't gone. It was just waiting to be rebuilt. The survivors cheered, their faces filled with joy and relief. They had found their purpose, their hope, and they were ready to fight for it. With Kale leading them, They knew that they had a future again. And as Kale looked toward the horizon, he could almost hear the Empress's voice in his mind. He had done it for her people, and for the galaxy. He had given everything to protect them, and now he was ready to lead them into a new era. The journey wasn't over, but it was a journey worth taking.